I'm starting now. Oh my gosh, I need to sneeze. Oh no. I hate when uh, hate when I need to sneeze on stream. Okay. Hello. Let me grab my monitor key. Okay, I think we're ready. Let me know if you can hear me, if everything sounds okay. I do apologize for the sound of the fan in the background. It is so hot. We have a heat wave going on, and I can't be in this room without it. And I can't keep the door open because then Akira comes in and chews on everything and jumps all over everything. So yeah, this fan life. And let's see. I hope my mic is working. If you are watching from the future, I'm going to put chapter markers in the screen on the description, I mean. So when you like hover over the video, you'll be able to see different chapters. So we'll jump to like the drawing and then the painting and all of that. Let me check, make sure they can hear me. You can't hear the fan. Okay, good. You can hear me though? Okay, good. Thank you. Thanks for letting me know. I'm so excited to see you all. And I do think it's going to be a little quieter today. I had a bunch of people message saying they can't make it because it's like Mother's Day or busy event day. Saturdays are a little trickier, I think, in the summer. Um, but I think weekends overall are technically better. Okay, I'm glad you can't hear the fan. It's right behind me, blowing kind of down. So I was scared about that. As you can see, we are going to be using gouache today on toned paper, beige paper, with doing this river scene. And it's a rushing river, and these are the reference photos over here, which I have already posted all of this in the previous post. It's the references plus the value study sketch. So if you didn't already do that, I mean, it's okay, you're with me now, but it might be good to go back and kind of look at that at some point. This is hard to show in a photo, but one thing I like to do is print out my references and then put a little piece of tracing paper on top of one of them. And then I will draw on top with little notes. So sometimes I do different types of notes, but in this case, I'm doing my red arrows indicate the flow of the river and kind of how I want to remember that. And then the basic shape of the rocks. So really, really simplifying everything, like ultra simplified. And then of course, over here, you can see that as well. That was just a Sharpie, and then that was pencil. So let me know right now if you have any questions before we jump into the gouache part, like if you have any questions about this side of things. I also mentioned in that post that I have my original reference, and then I have one that's blurred down, which reduces some of the detail, especially in the rocks. And I think it's very distracting when you have like a high-res photo and there's a billion little cracks and crevices in the rocks. So blurring it sometimes is all you really need to do. But then this is a step further, which it's called posterize, I believe, and it reduces all the colors down. Although I will say it's not very accurate with color. You can kind of get the gist of it, but it's more like it groups colors close together. So you can see large black here, here, here. What I can see from that is that that's just a dark area, but I can make whatever color I want to be. And same with the highlights on these areas and the water. What this shows me in the water is that there is some sun coming through the water, especially here. So that's why we have a bit of turquoise. I can see much more of that in the reference photo. So I see turquoise here and here, but especially here. So it's just like a quick little visual cue, like don't forget this has a bit of sun coming through, and you can use that or not. Like you can kind of take it as guidance. And the way I did that is in Photoshop. So I open the photo. This is just a Gaussian blur, and then this is posterize. So when you select the image and click posterize, you can change how much it does that. So you can make it like extremely minimal or really detailed. So there's like a range. There may be other settings you can do that are similar, like pixelating it maybe would help, or there's different effects you can do, but it's the only reason to do that is, again, to simplify things, because especially with rocks, I find it's super distracting when you have all that detail staring at you. When, to me, the point of this painting, the point of this scene is not to paint every single crack in the rock. It's more about getting the feeling of the water rushing through the rocks and the sun beaming through it and all of that. This is a very quick little version that I did. Maybe I can show a close-up. Just to figure out if I liked my color choices before the paint-along. So, and yeah, I'm going to talk you through that. I'm glad the posts are useful. Good. And these are the colors we're going to use. So very simple. It's only 3 colors plus white: Naples yellow, cerulean blue, and alizarin crimson. You could technically use any primaries. These are the ones I was going with. The reason I like this combination is the greens are very earthy, but you can still get a pop of turquoise here. So this is the Shinhan brand. Some other brands have different versions of these colors, maybe a little different, but and then of course we have purples and dark tones here. The interesting thing about these color choices is that your darkest dark is technically in here. So it's in this purple range. And if you add like a hint of the yellow into that, you'll get more of a brown. But even in this, you can see my darkest darks are not like black or anything. It's very stylized. There's blue in the shadows, and in the dark areas, there's purple, a bit of brown. And I love that. Like, I love when I'm not able to mix a pure black color, because it keeps the overall painting feeling very light and almost like whimsical. It's very stylized, obviously. So that's just a quick, I guess, tip if you're trying to go with more stylized colors. Choosing 3 primaries that don't allow you to mix down into that deep black is maybe an option. Cerulean blue is actually a pretty light color. It doesn't really ever get super dark, so that's why you have to mix, if you had Prussian blue or ultramarine even, like on their own, those colors can be extremely dark and you could use them as your darkest dark, but this is not possible. You'd have to mix it with this. So that's kind of fun. These are just the colors mixed with white. So it's actually a quite versatile palette. I love the greens with this palette, especially. I've been playing with it a lot in my studies. So we'll set that aside. Oh, and this middle part is just like an even mixture of all 3. And then I lean it a little bit towards yellow or red or blue, whichever. So, okay, so no other questions? I need to remember to drink water today. I always forget that while I do a paint-along. I think we're going to start just by... Oh, actually, I am going to tape my paper down because I think it helps in the context of, talking about edges, I guess. Thank you. If you're ever trying to make your colors a little bit more stylized, you can start by just changing the color of the shadow. So do your painting how you would normally do it, except make sure your shadows are maybe purple or just dark blue or something like that. And that alone will make a drastic difference and it makes it look really stylized. And then you could do the same thing with highlights or midtones in another painting and just like make baby step towards it. Baby steps. I'm actually about to finish this small spiral sketchbook probably tomorrow. So I just posted a sketchbook tour over on YouTube today of my previous beige sketchbook. This one is already a few pages in. And then this one is about to be finished, so I may have another tour soon. I am going to be using my gray plastic piece of paper as my, let's put this on top so that this is always visible. This is sort of our reference. I'm going to use my gray plastic sheet as my mixing tray today. Is this zoomed out? Yes. Okay, are we ready? Let's see if we have any last minute questions. Hello, Joshelle. If you covered this elsewhere. Hey, Kat. The boxes are going to be available again, hopefully at the end of May, this month. And the cool thing about this time around is that it won't be a pre-order. We already have everything made or nearly done, and you order it and it starts shipping. So it's a much faster turnaround and hopefully good to go for the summer, which is great. Okay, let's get started. And I wanted to mention, if you're doing this with watercolor, this is definitely still possible for the most part, like what I'm going to explain. You may just need white gouache, but let's talk about layering, because that's the most important thing in this painting, in this technique I'm going to show you. With watercolor, obviously, if you're not using white gouache, you're going to reserve the paper as your highlight, which makes it a lot trickier. So, maybe doing masking fluid might work for that as well, or just being really careful. But the rocks, you could probably still get a good result if you're doing watercolor with what I'm about to say. So the first thing I do when I think about a scene like this, besides come up with my composition, is when it comes to painting, that is, how am I going to layer everything? It's pretty basic. I guess my approach is I completely ignore what I see on the surface of the water. So to start out, I ignore all of this white, foamy waviness, all of the white on the water. And I purely I like squint my eyes and I see what's below that water. So if we squint at our reference, let's zoom in a little. Hopefully you have a better version of the reference already open on your own computer. So if you squint at it, I see kind of a pale light blue here. Again, ignoring all this white. Below that white, I can see hints of turquoise, maybe like a bluish green. Over here, there's definitely rocks closer to the surface underneath this little waterfall. So I see dark brown and blue, tiny hints of green here and there. Over here, I see lots of turquoise and green underneath. I see deep blue here and kind of a grayish blue here and a bit of turquoise. So that's what I start painting first, in addition to the rocks. Completely ignore the white. We do the white last, or maybe almost last. And for the rocks, again, it does help if you blur it a little, or kind of, I guess you can just squint your eyes at it and it'll reduce the detail. But what I do is try to see the overall color of the rocks, and in this it's pretty orangey brown, so it's a very warm brown tone, and that's going to be what I start with. kind of a slightly darker than my paper, obviously, like a warm brown tone. And then from there, I start looking at where all these deep rocks, cracks are, or like the deep, deep crevices. And again, this posterized version does that really well, where it kind of clumps all these big shapes together. So we can try to think about this in bigger, more simplified shapes. In my little sketch over here, you can see I super, super simplified it. So the edge of the rock kind of plunging down into the water is there's lots of dark cracks, but there's also some bright highlights where the water like splashes the rock and then reflects the sky. But I'm still going to start with that warm brown tone because that gives me a base, and I just do everything else on top. And then down here, it's the same kind of strategy. So back to make sure that's centered. Yeah, like here you can see it's very dark, but over here it's not so dark. So this kind of overdoes it sometimes. I can take hints from that, and I can see that there are some dark darks here, but I don't have to make the whole side of it dark. I can, and that would just be a stylistic choice. And the tops of the rocks are much more pale brown, so they're reflecting the sky. And any of parts of the rock that were wet are much darker. And any parts of, actually, the parts of the rock that are wet are much, much darker. And in some areas, depending on the angle they face away from us, they are reflecting the sky because there's water on the rocks. So they're a bit shiny. So in my little example, I did that a little bit here and there. First, I started with my base tone, which is these colors. And then I started dipping down more into the shadow tones, so my purplish blue tones for my shadows. And then finally I did a bit of reflection, all really, really quick marks, so like dry brush, quick marks. And it gives you that lovely broken brush stroke, which kind of, I think, lends itself nicely to rock textures. If you're going for really smooth rock, obviously you want to make it a little bit less dry brush. And I think that's pretty much the strategy. You know, you can make the rocks as simplified as you want. You know, they can just be big shapes to start with. Maybe the first time around, if you're not super familiar with painting or drawing rocks, you can do something like this, kind of basic, clumping your shapes together. So maybe it's a bit more jagged, and then on the top it's a bit flatter. Just, you know, you can ease into it. Over here I did go a little bit further in rendering some of the different rocks, but for the most part I don't tend to draw everything in super detail on my drawing before painting because I'm going to cover most of it up. I just want to guide myself along and know where my major shapes are. So one of the most important things in this painting will be this center rock, because obviously the water flows around that. Whatever happens up here and down here is kind of secondary to me. This is definitely the key. So I want to make sure I have that first. And instead of putting it like smack dab in the middle, I want to do it slightly to the left, I think, maybe up a little, because then I have much more room to play with all the fun water textures down here. So let's start with that. And all I do is like really simplified gesture. I do know that it can be a little intimidating, or I guess even frustrating when you first start drawing rocks, because they can be so complex. So I just try to have a loose hold on my pencil. Start with the outline of the overall shape, and then I can start cutting in like more obvious marks. So I did the overall gesture, and now I'm just thinking like, okay, where do I want some of the... and you can copy the reference photo pretty closely if you'd like, but otherwise, you know, you can invent your shapes. Maybe I want slightly different. Maybe I want less rounded edges or more rounded edges. The right side is definitely, going to have lots of shadow, so I can just color that in to remind myself if I want to, but I'm still keeping it really loose. And, at first, again, I don't really go into like a ton of detail because I'm going to cover it up and I end up changing things along the way. So even if this is just to start as my guide and it looks like a hot mess, it's completely fine. And then from there, I did kind of put it in the center, didn't I? That's okay. Here we have some rocks coming down which sort of block some of the water, and maybe I can add in a bit of a waterfall flowing this way. It might be fun if I have enough space. But I'm going to keep this side. The bottom is going to be simple. I don't even know if I'll add rocks here. I may just do water down there. And then up here, there's kind of a skinny channel of water flowing here, so I don't need to bring it down too far. One thing I used to do a lot when I started drawing clusters of rocks was I would just do this. And I would just block in my major shapes, or round in, circle in my major shapes. Or you could do cubes if that helps. But, thinking about this as all these overlapping cubes, that definitely takes practice as well, like seeing all the edges and faces of the rock. One thing that's really, really great is to just practice drawing simplified shapes in 3D like that on loose sheets of paper over and over and over and over, hundreds or thousands of times, and all different angles, because this is kind of repetitive. I don't want all my rocks to be the same, so in the end I'll definitely need to add variety to these. I'm just showing an example. Maybe some of them are a bit strange shaped, so yeah, but I'm gonna have these kind of fade off to the top. The water is coming from down here, so this is going to be like that pale blue I mentioned and flowing into more of our color. But that's kind of it for the rocks. I'll give you guys a second to catch up with that. And maybe just add a bit more detail to some of them. Let me know if you have any questions before we jump into the paint. Sometimes I just fill pieces of computer paper with random shapes. Like I'll start with a cone, and then I'll do a cube, and then a cylinder, and all these different things, but try to draw them in 3D and in all different angles. I think that really helps make you more sensitive to seeing those shapes in nature, which ultimately helps draw them and make them more accurate. Otherwise, you're going in kind of blind and you're just getting lost in all the different things. Maybe I should take a quick photo of this, so if someone is watching, or I can add that to the description, because it might be useful for someone. Speaking of photos, oh my gosh, you guys. I'll let you guys catch up for a second, but I'm going to quickly geek out. This is what I saw last night, which won't come across super clearly in the video, but the aurora was the strongest I've ever seen it, directly above me. It was like looking at some kind of crazy 90s screensaver. It was so mental. And I was out there from 11:30 p.m. till 2 a.m. taking photos and trying to do a time lapse. But it was, I still can't put words to it. It was otherworldly and beautiful. It made me cry. It was so amazing. So people all over the UK could see it, even way down south. I actually had to look south to see it. Usually I've never had to, you always have to look north. That's the only way you see it. But it was so insanely strong that I had to look straight up or south. And people all over the US who've never seen it saw it as well. People in Europe, everywhere. But if you had bad weather, that wouldn't have worked, obviously. So we really lucked out. There was no wind. It was warm out. There were barely any clouds. It did get foggy at one point, but my time lapse seems to have come out okay. I just need to put it all together, and it's supposed to be really good tonight as well. So if you missed it last night, keep an eye out for tonight. Even people in the middle of Glasgow and Edinburgh could see it, and that's with a lot of light pollution. So that tells you something. So yeah, keep an eye out for. Actually, it might not just be tonight. It might be a while because we've had so much solar activity. Okay. Yeah, I think these are the colors. So let's get some paint on our palette. I'm going to try to mix here so you can see what I'm mixing, but I'll also talk you through it as I go, and actually I'll have a little scrap piece of paper that I can test things on if I need to. I'm a little worried about how fast my gouache is going to dry because my fan is blowing on me. But you know what? I need to start getting used to that because it's summer, and that's the reality of gouache in the summer. Either the fan's blowing on me or it's hot and sunny out, drying my gouache instantly. I may actually take this off and put it up here just so during the painting you guys can see everything a little better, or maybe here. Does that help if that's like that? That's the original. If you want to see more of the aurora, I will definitely do some photos or time lapse in my next video, my Sarah in Scotland channel. So I am really behind on editing vlogs for that because a lot of reasons, but one of the big reasons was my laptop was in the MacBook repair center because Akira chewed the monitor. My cerulean tends to dry out pretty quick, so this should be interesting. Oops. Did I just lose the cap? No, I did. Oh gosh, it's coming out. Quick, close it. Oh yes, I did. I finally got it back after a nightmare with UPS. They basically lost it for over a week, and Apple and UPS were blaming each other, and I had nothing I could do. I had to file a claim with UPS, and there was like no activity or movement on it for ages. And then out of the blue, it started moving. It's like, what is happening? And it was a bit fishy because in the same week, Wolfie's dad works in IT, and they were like sending some kind of tablet somewhere, and UPS also lost theirs. It's like, what is going on? I think I'm going to use my flat brush. I may grab some others along the way, but I think that's a good option. I like doing flat brushes with rocks, especially because I make them really chunky. Chunky rocks. Okay, are we ready to rock? Oh my gosh, I didn't even mean that pun. That was pretty good. So this is the part where it might work if you're doing watercolor as well, because for the initial layer of water, as I mentioned, I'm ignoring all that white. I'm just thinking about the color I see below the white. I do it a little bit diluted, so I get it kind of wet, and then I touch the color in and I let it flow and bleed. And this paper isn't the greatest for that, but it still works, and I like the look of it. So that's what I'm going to start with. just getting the paper a little wet wherever my water is going to be. And it's totally fine if this overlaps into my rocks. And we'll probably just jump straight into the rock color after this initial layer. All right. So squinting my eyes down, I can see we have blue, and I'm keeping it really milky, like tea, milk or tea consistency on my palette. I don't want it to be super, super opaque yet. And I'm also going to mix actually a hint of white in there because it's a lot more pale in the distance. And it's you can always just start with some color because my paper is beige and I'm using translucent gouache. It's going to let some of that beige color show through, and it's going to mute down my color, whatever transparent color I'm using. So that actually works to my advantage. And yeah, I like that. I could even touch a hint of alizarin into it because, it's a bit on the purplish, bluish, brownish, gray side. There's all sorts of colors happening there. But once I get to this point, this is where I really have to be careful with my color. So I'm going to start with blue. We're going to mix up the turquoise now. So blue, yellow. That's pretty green, and I can test it, but that looks pretty close actually. This is why it's awesome to have your photo printed, because you can just hold it up next to it and see if you're at all close. But again, we can always come back with more of this. It's not like this is where the beauty of gouache makes me happy, like the layering capabilities. Maybe a bit more yellow to emphasize the warmth of the sun coming through this section. So like I said, we're just totally ignoring the water. So now I'm mixing blue and my alizarin, so it's like a purple. And I'm going to start painting it down here. It definitely looks more gray on this paper when it's diluted like this, but that works for me. And I'm just sweeping it into, each color, I'm sweeping it into each other, letting it fade. And I could even go deeper than that. This is where I have to be brave because I can always add white on top of it to make those little white ripples, or like pale ripples. So I need this color to be deep enough, which it's not yet, but that's also because it's diluted. So I'm just gonna keep mixing that deep color and touching it in. But you can see on this paper, as soon as I start layering on wet paper, it's kind of pushing it or picking it up. It's not allowing me to layer quite yet. So I will be patient. Get a little bit more there. And I like doing quick marks like this because some of that will show through in the end underneath all the white we do on top. So over here we have, clean my brush off. On this side of where the waterfall is, we have kind of a pale bluish green. That looks pretty good. I'm purposefully keeping my brush strokes really loose because I don't want to get too fussy right now. This is way too early to think about detail. This is where we're just like blocking in our big shapes. So it's shifting down into this purple as it flows down this waterfall. Really deep actually, really dark. It's more of a brown, so maybe I even need a bit of yellow because it is not blue and it's not red, but the yellow lightens it because it's Naples yellow. So that's another tricky thing about this combination. It forces you to be really strategic about color placement. Like if I can't get really dark, this is my darkest dark, where am I gonna put that compared to all my lights? Ooh, I like this. I like what's happening here. That's not happening in the reference, but I like it, so I'm going to leave it. Basically, it looks like it's just the light's catching the top of that waterfall right there, that turquoise, and I like it. So let's lean it down towards blue again. As it pours down over the waterfall, I'm darkening it a little with the blue. Although the white of the water is going to be coming over this, it's just I want little bits of this darkness peeking through the white. So again, it's all about layering. But I'm using very minimal pigment, not super thick. I'm just dry brushing kind of. Now that the paper's starting to dry, I can do a little more dry brush. I could also do this deep color over here I mentioned now. So where this rock, it's a much darker color over there. And down at the base, like down here, it's pretty dark. There's a hint of green here. Oops. Like underneath the water rushing, there's hints of that. So I need more of that greenish blue. A bit more green. But again, I'm still using pretty transparent color. It's not quite opaque yet. I may need to let this totally dry first, but it's okay. We'll just add a bit and then see how that dries. Again, it's going to dry different because it's translucent, so the gouache already changes color and value when it dries, and when you add more and more water, it's even more drastic, and when you have beige paper underneath, it's even more drastic. So I really need to be patient, which is not my forte. Let's just break up some of these bigger chunks. So now there's a bit of darkness over here. I think maybe some more blue down there. Already it's pretty, we have a good start with the base. So we can let that dry and we can start our rock, the base of our rock color after I drink water. So let's see, what do we want? The original, when I did my test, I kind of liked this color as my base, leaning towards red-ish now and then. But I can't go too dark with my mid-tone with my base because I need to preserve my darks for all those cracks, all the shadows. So I'll definitely keep it like a little more on the warmer side. And I can be more opaque now. That's pretty bright. Do we want that to be our base? That's kind of intense. Maybe a bit more yellow and even a bit of white to desaturate it. Even a bit of blue would make it more brownish. And that definitely will dry darker, so that might work. So I'll just start up here. And I'm filling in the whole thing first. I hear a kitten trying to get in. I'm gonna have to add shadows and all sorts of things to this edge, but for now, following my original strategy. So that worked pretty well. I'll mix up more of that. I can't like completely color match it but Now we definitely need to be more opaque than the water. And actually, I'm actually going to ignore this rock because I'll need to do all that white before I paint this because this is in front of it. So this little base color is fine, but I'm not going to do any other detail on it. I just realized I've actually painted a very similar scene before, although it was a totally different location and like color palette, and I did it, I think it was a Skillshare class or something. Anyways, yeah, that's actually a good point. If we want to have our water, our white of our water, it's hard to paint around rocks with that, so it's probably ideal to at least do this section before we move on. Which means we should actually finish these rocks first because the water's going to flow over the edge of those. So my darkest dark, this is where the challenge comes in. Let's mix our darkest possible color. I think, like when I look at if I squint my eyes at these, it's definitely the purple, like this area, I think. So maybe slightly more, just a bit of blue mixed in. Let's try. And now is when I'm thinking about where are my darkest darks. I'm just going to block in some of these, and I'm using a dry brush almost always at this point when I'm doing my rocks. But now I don't want to follow just these blocks that I painted in. Like, I don't want the final rocks to look exactly like cubes. Now is my chance to sort of stylize them and round them out and give them some personality. So I can squint at my reference and see big dark shapes, and that's all I'm painting right now. There's a lot of shadow under the lip of these rocks as the water flows. So that's what I'm keeping in mind. And even if you go a little overboard with darkness at your shadows at this point, you can always come back and add highlights or just erase it completely, because gouache can be picked up or blended. How are we doing? Anyone have any questions or concerns? I know this is pretty fast. That's, you can try to paint along as fast as you can, but then also come back and pause and replay things after the fact. Or if you're watching in the future, just pause it as you need to. Bit of shadow. The thing is with me and rocks, I have to work quick, otherwise I make them look way too repetitive and stiff. It's just a thing I have. Stiff rock syndrome. So I try to be kind of fearless and just sweep quick marks. Okay. Now I'm not trying to make anything too repetitive either. Like, I don't want round, 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 or block, 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 or the same size. It all has to kind of look a little bit different. On the front edge of the rock, it's definitely more, it's wet right where it kind of gets down near the water. So I'm going to choose artistically to make that a pinkish tone, which isn't as dark as the purple. So it still works in my values. And if I want later, I can come back with the highlights I mentioned before to like reflect the wet rock. So this is just translucent reddish anywhere that I think maybe would be a bit wet or like a medium shadow. And we're going to cover the edge with white, so I'm not too concerned about that yet. Just need to give myself a good start. Maybe some white mixed into that color I just used would work for the light reflecting, because it kind of keeps it harmonized. It's definitely not, it's still transparent, but not super, super opaque. I mean, not super saturated. And just kind of gives a hint of a little reflection or something going on there, just on the wet part. And then the reflections on the rocks up like where the sun is hitting them on the dry rock, will definitely be a little bit lighter, probably like a dirty orangey brown color. This would be a good use of lilac, actually, if you have lilac. Little dots or splashes of water hitting the rocks now and then. But it does dry very, very different. Like I have to put it down and then see if it's opaque enough or if it needs a bit more. So again, the patience comes in. So if I want to highlight the tops of the rocks, I may just do some Naples yellow and white, and dry brush, and just really loosely sweep that over a few edges. So the brighter this color compared to the darkest dark, especially if they're right next to each other, it's going to make it feel even like the sun is really, really bright, beating down on these rocks. And it was a really bright sunny day, so that works. It helps tell the story of the lighting that day. Okay, I think I'm not going to go too crazy with detail up here. But hopefully you get the idea of my layering technique. We could always come back with more, but we'll leave that for now. Now I can see how my water dried. If I want, before I do any white, I have to make sure the rest of the water is completely done. Like it just doesn't work to come back into that. So if I may need a bit more variety in the water up here. I made it a little too light, I think, because if it's too light here, the white won't show up against the color, which won't give you quite the same dramatic effect. But back here, like I'm just using a very diluted pale blue, and I'm just thinking about the water flowing around this curve coming down. So sometimes my brush strokes will mimic the direction of the water. Sometimes they won't. They'll just be random, kind of roughing up the surface of the water. But a few directional brush strokes like that, I think actually do really, really help. Especially when the hairs start drying out and they separate, it gives you a nice like scratchy look for those ripples on the water. Okay. And then maybe a bit more darkness in the turquoise here would work. I think it dried a little too light. So, especially here behind this rock, it's not, if I look at the reference closely, like the green here isn't quite as light as it is here. So that is what I'm looking at now. That's what I'm mixing here. But in comparison, like when you see this deep turquoise next to this bright turquoise, it's like, oh, the sun is really flowing through that section. It's that it's when they're next to each other, it makes more sense. um, so maybe a bit more darkness here. I don't want to mess up this too much because I really like it. Maybe just a couple pops of dark green. And I think it does. This is why we didn't do this rock yet, because painting around this rock is really annoying. So I just still want to sweep my brush over it. If I need a long streak, that would interfere. I think it is darker underneath that rock, so just a hint more darkness there. I just realized I painted on my reference. I like the idea of the water coming. So in this sketch I did, the water flowing, 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 and then it swirls back this way and then down. So I'm going to try to do that with my brush strokes. So like a little bit here. But this will be, parts of this will be underneath the white foaminess. But the transition from this bright green to the dark bluish purplish here is important. We definitely want to maintain that green there. I'm trying not to cover it too much, but it's not pure green, not pure bright green there. So we'll just kind of bring a bit more blue back into the water, because I did go really purple with it, which, that's a fun stylization, but I could at least break it up a bit, because it's all just one big color. My brush is super, super dry and it's separating, which I think is perfect for getting all these broken streaky marks. Works really well for, if you think about it, underneath this water, there's tons of rocks. And instead of sitting here and like painting all the shadows between each one, I'm kind of implying that by letting it be streaky and blocky, splotchy. And even if it ends up being mostly covered by white, hints of that will show through, and it's important. I think we're pretty much ready. Again, I'm just squinting my eyes at both reference and the painting and seeing if it's looking okay. I think I might need a hint more green here, but I could also do that in the final white application. But just like where the white is going to be pouring down here, I think there is a bit more green. So I'm dry brushing a bit of that turquoise back in. Really light touch. If you go too wet and too heavy-handed, it will just pick up whatever's below it. But this is why, at least with the way I use gouache, like my tubes of gouache last forever, because so often I'm using just like really translucent and really light touch. Like it's tons of thin layers. Not always, but okay. I think we're pretty much ready for the fun white part. So what we'll do is just start from the background and move forward. So we'll do swirling white here. Then we need to paint this rock because this white will be in front of that. So step by step moving forward. But I think this is like definitely the fun part of the painting, the white. I always want to go straight to the splashing white. But hold on, before I, like, if I was just squinting my eyes again at my reference, and I think there needs to be a tiny bit of brown here because there are rocks really close to the surface here, and I need to kind of hint at that So I'm mixing my alizarin, my Naples, and a bit of blue, but definitely leaning it towards reddish because, again, this is such a stylized palette. Uh, I don't have, I have to use my color strategically. So I'm just little hints of, basically, it's like if the water is super clear here, pouring over the surface, and we'll just do like a white dry brush over that, hints of this is going to show through, and it's going to signal to the viewer that the rocks are right there, but I'm not painting over the deep shadows yet. I think even like where I did the turquoise here, there may even be like a hint of rock showing through. So I'll just do like little hints of brown there. Yeah, okay. So I'm ready. She says, does the question. Maybe just a tiny bit more blue, deep blue here. I don't want to get rid of my turquoise, pops of turquoise here because I really like it, but I think the white does need to stand out against something darker for it to show up as prominently as nicely. So I think it'll just help if I darken that a little bit. Okay. All right, let's do it. Let's get the white. I'm gonna switch to my smaller flat. It's a quarter inch. This is really great for water because it's such long hairs and it's really soft, so I can like load it up with white but then really gently drag it, and you get a lot of brush drag. So that gives you a super broken, oh my gosh, my white dried with like a skin. Actually, that is perfect when your white is really gooey at this point because you don't want it to be thin. You want it to be thick and sticky so that it just drags with really intense dry brush. So let's zoom in a little. Now I am simply I'm gonna keep it a little lighter up here, just like it's almost sparkling. Oh, I just heard Floki meow outside my door. I'm just drawing basically with white at this point. It's like little sparkles on this water back here, but I'm not going to do too much. Little swirls now and then coming forward, but this is where it really starts. So I'll load up my brush like it's super covered. And first I'll think about my major areas I want to have the water flowing, and I'll just do a few really intense marks, but this is so easy to overdo. Like you could really go overboard and end up covering too much and then you can't go back. So I mean, if you do that, just learn from it, as always. But now and then it's gonna kind of overlap the rocks. As you keep touching it, it will pick up the color underneath, so it'll tint it. It won't be pure white anymore, so I'm always reloading if I want that really bright white. And I'm thinking about how the water doesn't just go flat. It's not straight across. It's like undulating as the waves go over the rocks that are there, which is totally up to you to design. You know, it's not... the reference does show that, but you know, if you're good luck trying to copy every single white mark you see in the reference. I think it's more fun and looks better when you kind of work with what you have on your paper. Now and then I will also like scrub it, so I can get some more random splashy marks, unpredictable. I don't want everything to just be like flow, line. I need it to be a little more broken and rough now and then, because it does actually splash and move in different ways. Now it doesn't just go flowy. That was my water sound effect. And then bit down here. It kind of like comes around this rock, but I can't do anything here yet because I haven't painted these. It's so tempting, but we're holding off. We'll just finish this part. No, my brush is super, super dried out. I like the idea of it hitting some of these rocks and then like splashing up a little bit. If your brush is super dried out to the point where like nothing is flowing, you can get it dried off, or I mean, you can swirl it in your water, clean it off, but then completely dry it, like really, really dry it, because you want to go back to that dry brush. It's just that it sometimes gets like really clogged up. I can do some of the swirls coming forward here. And actually now and then I don't want it to be pure white, so maybe I do want a bit of blue and green, but like really, really, really subtle. Especially if it's next to a rock, it might, you know, be in a slight shadow and it'll be tinted just ever so slightly. I think it just helps to break up a bit of that white if you go a little bit too thick with something. So that's something we could save for the end when when we see it all as it is. But if I want more white coming from behind, I'm trying to ignore these visually right now. I'm just painting what I think I see happening behind the rocks. So water flowing. My brush is not too dry. It's not completely dry, so sometimes if you don't dry it out, you'll get more of a soft line, and that could work here and there. You know, you might actually want that, but just be, you know, make sure it's your choice, not an oops. Yeah, okay, I think that could work. As long as whatever is behind this is done, then I can move on. Okay. How's it going? I think I need a splash of pure white there. Sorry if I'm breathing into the mic. I just realized I'm really close to it and I'm trying not to heavy breathe on the viewers. Okay. Now we're going to go back to the rock strategy. The rock strategy was to have my base tone, which I pretty much have, but then for the dark darks, I've got my purplish blue, which is especially important on the right side, so I'll make sure I get that. And as soon as I touch it over the white, it's going to pick up some white and lighten it a little, so I need to keep reloading my dark. White just, you know, gets into everything. I'm remembering that I also will come back with my reddish tone and paint the wet rocks. English, please. Don't abandon me yet. Oh yeah, sometimes I put a line and then I just mess it up with my finger to make it less perfect. It's kind of hard to tell in some of the references sometimes, but like the darkest part of the water will often feel so dark that it's darker than the rock cracks. But I think if you think about it logically, there's some of these deep cuts into the rock are so the light is so obscured. There's not light bouncing around inside there. So it makes more sense to make those the darkest thing. Whereas on the water, even though it looks really, really dark, like sometimes the darkest thing, there is still going to be light either bouncing off the surface of the water or through the water slightly. So even if it's ever so subtle, it is going to be not the darkest thing. So in this case, where I have a very stylized palette, I would use maybe just the pure blue as my dark on the water. So where there's like ripples on the I can't get some on my brush. Where there's like dark ripples coming out from this area, I would use pure blue because that will visually separate it from what's happening on the rock, especially all those darks. Does that make sense? That was really hard to articulate. In my head, it all made sense. Oh, man. Okay, so then we'll do a bit. Try not to be sad that you white covered part of your favorite rock. Oh no! Is it like you can't save it? Is that just gone? I get it. It's happened to me many a time. So this reddish tone is what I was using as the wet rock color. So kind of where the water's splashing up and hitting that. We haven't even done the highlights yet either, so it's so fun to like sculpt rocks in this way. I love it. And every time I do it, I try to surprise myself a little. I think if I sit there and think about it too much, I just make a hot mess with rocks. Just let it go. you know it's there in spirit. And then I'm going to do my highlights. So I'll have my bright, so Naples yellow and white. And anywhere that I want maybe to feel like the sun is catching it more. Ooh, that was in the wrong place. Oh, I haven't done my shadow highlights. So blue and white mixed into that reddish color I did. Kind of a lavenderish tone, I guess. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving because it is already been an hour. It's everyone's busy, I know. I think I'll just jump into the next water. So yeah, the water coming down here. I am gonna use this brush for just a second to get maybe a slightly bigger white. Basically, the way I see this, to make it look like the water's pouring down this waterfall, I'm ignoring what's right here and I'm just starting there. And in a way, I think there's a rock here and the water is catching the edge of that rock as it pours down and it's all being aerated. So that's why it's all white there. But there are peaks of what's below showing through. So I need a really broken brush stroke. And I like this brush because it separates and then it just makes it more like automatically you get that broken effect. Moment of truth. Don't mess it up. Don't mess it up. Just kidding. It's like a short waterfall. It's not too much. So I'm not trying to go. Also, I need to keep reloading because it will pick up that color a little bit. That's a bit too hairy looking for me. So now I'm going to switch back to my other brush. But at least that gets me started with some of those little marks, or I don't know what, yeah, like little streams coming off of that edge. With this little brush, it takes a lot longer. That's why I often use my bigger brush. Also, this is not dry enough yet. Okay. So there's some kind of splashiness happening here. Then the base. And then it immediately gets foamy and wild at the base of that. So I'm really scrubbing it, and I have to really reload a lot because it just will, as I scrub it in, it's picking up that color below. Now and then it is good for that it does that because it kind of tints and it makes it so it's not all just like totally pure white. I do want lots of pure white, but it doesn't have to be the whole thing. And actually, even towards the edge, this outer edge of that, there's a lot more turquoise visible. So I can even though I did add a bit of that here, I can make more on the surface. Like the water is turned up and tinted. Wow, it's really sticky, so I gotta clean my brush. I really hope the stats hold out for the Aurora. Now that I went and I was there from 11:30 to 2 a.m. and it was still going super strong. And when I woke up, I saw photos throughout the whole night. But I was just so tired because I had been woken up the previous morning by my cats at 5 a.m. And it'll probably happen tomorrow. Then what was I gonna say? Oh, but when I was there, like I kept changing the angle because like something exciting would happen near me or next to me or behind me. So my time lapse maybe isn't long enough to be like a long, smooth, interesting time lapse. So tonight, if it happens again, I'm determined to just pick a spot and leave it, no matter what. That's the tricky thing. You have like FOMO when you're doing it because you're like, oh, if I just had it facing that way, it would look better. But then, you have to have hundreds of photos for the time lapse to be smooth. Right now, I think my time lapse is multiple views. In each view is like 10 to 20 seconds long. Okay, let's come back up here because I don't want to cover too much here. I love the variety that's happening there, but it is still pretty white and like foamy up here. And it splashes up against this rock before it comes down. And it's all turned up here as it swirls around. A lot of white over here. I'm just really quick marks, letting it kind of be glittery. Oh, I hope you get to see it too. So far, the stats are looking good, so let's just hope the weather holds out. It's been really cloudy but bright and sunny all day, so it's like it could go either way here. Oh, the city lights, yeah. I could even see it from my house, just not as strong because we have street lights, so that's why I went to the coast. Oh, thanks. I think if, honestly, this is one of my favorite places in the world. There's such a sense of peace and just awe when you're standing by this river. It's on the Isle of Skye. It's called Sligahan, and it's huge. It goes for miles, and it just like cascades down and down and down and down. And it's not as deep or blue looking as like the fairy pools, which is another hot spot on Skye, but it's still absolutely gorgeous and way more private. Like you can go and walk up the trail a couple miles and be totally alone, which you absolutely can't do at the fairy pools. I need a bit more like some one thing that's really useful is to break up your brush and then just face it downwards, and you get all these little dots, which I think are good for little splashes. So, you know, you combine that with the other types of brush strokes. Now and then. Yeah, okay. So as long as I finish the water that's sort of flowing here, which is in front of my foreground rocks, there's also kind of like up here, there are ripples on the water down here, which are very light blue. So what you can do is mix up some pale light blue and then you know, make little quick marks. You could also do directional brush strokes here if you want to like continue that swirl. Maybe in a couple spots would be good. But I like how sometimes it's like really rushing and crazy, and then all of a sudden you'll get a swirly soft spot, and then it's really rushing and crazy next to it. It's kind of fun. I think this is where you can really push the stylization. You can make it more illustrative if you want, or yeah, you're almost like drawing with the paint in that sense. That might not dry light enough because there was a bit of water mixed in, but we'll see. Okay, let's move on to the, oh wow, there's a lot of water in that brush. So I'm gonna paint the base color of my rocks like I did before. So here, I really can't see my drawing anymore. I'm just kind of guessing there. I can kind of see it here. Never really finished the bottom rock, did I? Let's try maybe that. No, I don't want to end the rock here. I don't want to end it lined up with this rock because that'll be distracting. So I will push it a little further like that. Just a little lip maybe. So it kind of feels like you're standing on this rock here. But yeah, then from there I just do the same strategy as the other rocks, really. Maybe there's a couple small rocks here. I don't know. Kind of making it up as I go. But that's the fun part, I think. Also, like, if this is my focus, I don't really need to worry too much about these. They're like kind of supporting characters. I want them to make sense, but I don't. Maybe making them a little bit looser would actually help. I could have made this a lot looser, I think. Oh, that sounds nice. So yeah, the deep shadows, purplish. Zoom out a little so you can see my mixing more if you need that. It's always hard to balance. Like, I want to zoom in so you can see the detail, but then I want to show the whole palette. But you could see I've pretty much stayed in this one little spot as usual. I don't spread out too much. So on these rocks, I'm just gonna be really quick. I think I like, oops, way too much red. Touch of water because it's getting sticky. I want a nice dark hard edge here in front of this waterfall to make it feel like it's overlapping. I think I'm gonna have to paint over some of these shadows because they're a bit intense over here, but it's okay. The base is definitely darker where it goes down into the water. I'll do my wet rock color. Possibly too much again. I'm gonna have to shape the rock with my highlights, I think. I want to sometimes have rounded ones and sometimes have hard edges, so I think you can do that with the shadows and the highlights. As long as the shadows really make sense next to the water, I think it works. I will, if like I kind of want to add a highlight to the top of this rock, but if I do that, it'll get lost against all that white. So I'm going to leave it, or maybe even darken it just ever so slightly, just to separate it a little. It's super subtle, but it just kind of helps, I think. And then we'll do the foreground. Dark purple. Since this part isn't really in the reference, I have to make it up as I go, so yeah. Also, it's kind of nice to get a smaller brush sometimes and do really thin cracks. Or scratches, because these rocks do have a lot of that. I haven't done nearly as much as I could, but you know, again, to simplify it, you have to make choices. I definitely need a bright highlight on this one because it will help separate it from the water here. So maybe like even more pale. trying to work quick as well. As I mentioned, my fan is blowing right on me, so I can feel my paint getting super dry. So it's time to finish. It's tricky with gouache because I could spray it, but then it takes a minute to sink in, and then it's a little bit diluted, and then when I pick it up on the brush, I have to like babysit it a lot more. Whereas if I just paint fast before it all dries out completely, then I should have just used a Stay Wet palette because I have a fan on. But it's working fine for now. Okay. If I sit back a little bit, I can see it easier. If I'm like really leaning into everything, it's so just like I just get lost in it. And I'm like, what am I doing? I think I'm pretty much done though. Do you have any questions before we wrap it up? Anyone? I think they need a bit more pink variety down here. This is super fun. I don't know if I've done many toned paper tutorials on here. Because, I mean, this is pretty much all I do on my own now. I know most people do white paper. This is why I always, well, that's why I tend to use white paper in my tutorials. But on my own, I pretty much, with gouache anyway, especially lately, I only use beige paper. So, yeah, it's good to have that once in a while on Patreon. All right, I'm going to stop touching it because I will overdo it for sure. Let's put that back, and then we'll do the tape peel. I actually still have quite a bit of gouache left over. I may just have to put that in one of my Stay Wet palettes. Your tip yesterday about spraying the gouache before leaving home and made the paint outside much easier. Oh yeah, it really helps. Or like once you get to your location, immediately take out the palette, spray it, and then get all your rest of your stuff out. Oh, this is gonna be satisfying. Oh my gosh, that edge is so crisp. Oh, I'm glad it helped, Anne. I know it is a lot. I do know that. That's why having a strategy going into it really helps. If you sit down without any plan, oh man, it can be overwhelming. And you know, there's always more you can do. There's always, or, you know, in other cases, sometimes you overdo it, but you just have to learn from it and move on. But overall, have a plan. Even if it's a more simplified version, just kind of work your way up to the more detailed. Would you like a gray toned? I had a gray sketchbook and I didn't really love it. I think the beige paper just makes me happy because it's a warm color. And I do often use blue and purple in my shadows in a lot of my different landscapes, which pops against that warm tone. So it just suits my aesthetic. Oh, that's so satisfying. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm gonna label this Sligachen. Spelled Sligak. If you aren't from here, or I think the first time I said it, I said Sligachen. Sligachen. What's today? Today is the 11th. That's actually Sligachen Falls. Sky. There we go. Okay, I will take a photo of the final result. I'll post it in the Patreon chat as well as the Discord chat. And if you're new to Patreon, hello, welcome. I'm going to open the chat really quick. And so if you go to the Patreon app on your phone, there is a little menu down here. If you click the chat box, then there's art share, there's Sarah Burns chat, and there's introduce yourself. But in the art share, you can drop photos of whatever you're working on if you want. You don't have to, obviously, but that's where I share mine. And people are also sharing lots of other art and their Craft Elmo boxes, which is cool to see. I love that. And yeah, same in Discord. We have a little art chat in Discord, which is fun. So I hope you all have fun with this. Try it maybe with a couple different color combinations. See how far you want to push it to stylized versus realistic. And I hope it helps. So I'm going to sign off now. Good luck if you're out there tonight with the aurora. I hope you get to see it. I definitely will be, even if it's raining, because you never know. Sometimes the sky opens up. Take care, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you all soon.